What is the darkest secret you found out about a family member or a relative? Story 1. When I was a kid, we went to my grandma's house every Sunday, and all of my uncles and aunts would be there. One day, I noticed that one of my uncles didn't show up anymore, so I asked my family where he is. They told me that he wouldn't be able to visit anymore because he moved away. Years later, I found out that he raped and killed 2 women, and they locked him up. Story 2. My dad was born in rural Texas in 1915. He was the youngest of 10 kids, all a year apart. So his oldest sibling, Henry, was about 11 years older than him. My dad's father died in an accident not long after he was born, so Henry became the man of the house at about age 11. When my dad was about 9 years old in 1924, a gang of men came through their small town, kidnapping children to work as slaves, picking cotton about 400 miles away. Apparently, this was not an unusual occurrence at the time. My dad and 2 of his siblings were taken away. Henry, who was now 18 years old, came home from working on the cattle drive about a week later and found his mom hysterical about the kidnapping of 3 of her children. Being the man of the house at age 18, Henry strapped on his father's 6 guns, dual holsters, 1 on each hip, and set out to get his 3 siblings back. He gathered clues about the gang from other townsfolk who also had children stolen. He headed east to where he was pretty certain the kids were taken, riding in empty train boxcars and even on the roofs of moving trains. It took him several weeks, but through talking to locals along the way who heard rumors of child abductions, he finally narrowed down to a few cotton farms where he thought the kids were. My dad, who was 9 years old at the time this happened to him, had tears in his eyes when he told me this part of the story. He and 2 of his brothers, along with about a dozen other kidnapped kids, had been held captive on this cotton ranch for over 2 months and had given up and never seen home or the rest of their family again. They were kept locked in a barn, fed scraps, and forced to pick cotton in the hot Texas sun. They were beaten if they cried or refused to work. One day, working in the fields, they heard Henry's voice calling their names. They looked up and saw my uncle Henry walking towards them, and they started running towards him when one of their captors rode upon a horse and started yelling. Henry pulled one of his guns and shot the man dead. Wow. My dad wasn't even sure if the man had a gun, and it didn't matter. The gunshot drew a couple more of the captors over, and Henry killed them both as well. My dad ran up and hugged my uncle, and he told them, "Let's go home." Damn, Henry. My dad tells me they rode on train boxcars all the way back west to their little Texas town, along with a couple other kids that were stolen from the town. When they got back to their small farm, my dad said his mom fainted when she saw them. He said Henry put the 6 guns away and never touched them again. There was no law enforcement and no investigation about what had happened. That my uncle murdered 3 men to get his siblings back. It was basically still the Wild West in Texas in the 1920s. My dad didn't tell me this story until after Henry had died. I'd always known my Uncle Henry as a sweet, soft-spoken person who went on to own a printing shop. I would never have imagined him capable of the feats of heroics he performed at age 18 to bring his family back together. Now, that is like a superhero story, and the fact that they all joined the army and survived World War II without anyone dying, damn, seems like you guys were descendants of like Perseus or something like that. Next story. My father tried to kill my mother while she was pregnant with me. Jesus Christ. Next story. 2 years ago, I found out that my dad had a wife before my mom, and she died in a freak accident on their wedding night. She was sleepwalking and fell to her death over the balcony, if anyone was wondering. Well, I'm definitely not wondering. Next story. Stepfather was cheating on mother. Didn't find out because he was caught cheating. Found out because he and his mistress were drunk, got into a fight, and he punched her so hard that she fell over and died. Found out about the whole thing during the investigation, the trial, and the conviction. It was weird to have a lawyer want to call 12-year-old me to a stand to defend the character of a man I already knew had very little interaction and a fear of, and that was before the manslaughter charge. Story 6. My stepfather had a completely hidden life in Australia before he met my grandmother. He had a family and kids in Australia and faked his death by driving his car off a cliff. His kids thought he was dead until my grandmother found out about them and reached out years later. His son actually became a famous comedian over there. And from what I know, he does a joke about his father faking his death to disconnect from them. Well, coincidence? I think not. Story 7. Both of my mother's parents had affairs without the other's knowledge. My grandmother had Parkinson's, and in one of our confused states, she told my grandfather that she had an affair. Suffice to say, my grandfather was not happy and put her in a home. He then started talking to my mother, trying to figure out when it could have happened. He speculated that it happened around the same time he was having an affair, which was around 1966. My mother was shocked. She was born in 1967. So, what the? So, my mother may or may not be related to the man she believed to be her father. Someone replied, wait, why was he so pissed she had an affair? So he put her in a home, but he was also having an affair. Well, that's people for you. Story 8. My mom and dad decided to take in my 3 cousins because their mom got into a horrible car accident. 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls were 6 and 10, the boy was 12. Fast forward to when the 6-year-old girl is 14 years old and is asked about birth control. She starts sobbing, saying her brother, the then 12-year-old, took her virginity when she was 6, and that it continued until she was about 13. We had no clue. Well. Story 9. Found out the hard way that my grandfather was a sexual predator. Turns out my grandmother had been in denial, despite both my aunts, their friends, and young girls in this small town claiming he had raped and molested them. Grandma lied about his whereabouts, activities for years to protect him because if he went to jail, she'd be unable to afford their house. So, long story short, me and my 10-year-old cousin were his latest and final victims. Thanks, Grandma. Well, that was way too dark for me. Next story. My 2 remaining grandparents, my father's father and my mother's mother, married each other when they were 75. This made my mother and father's stepbrother and stepsister, since the son of my father's sister, my aunt, is my cousin, and the son of my mother's brother, my uncle, is also my cousin. I became both cousins. I am therefore my own cousin. I'll never be alone. Oh God. Please like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.